All right, so welcome to our cultural conversations. Tonight we are talking about relationships, and it's been a while, but we've covered marriage, relationship, broken relationships, and tonight we're covering dating and singleness. I'm always going to reference the book we've been using, Christ-Centered Parenting, Gospel Conversations on Complex Cultural Issues. So if you want more resources about this, you can check that book out. We actually only have a few sessions left. So we've really been making headway, and I am excited to talk about this particular topic tonight. I think it's a relevant topic to people, parents all over the place. This one is especially relevant if you have teenagers or really middle schoolers, about to be teenagers, because goodness, don't we know that our children are aware of romantic relationship things younger and younger the longer we go. So that's what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about dating and singleness. So let's pray to get started. Father, thank you so much for the chance to have this conversation. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to our children about this topic. I know it can be kind of a nervous thing for us to know exactly how to steward this conversation well. And I ask that you'll guard our hearts and minds. I pray that you'll give us wisdom to share your love with the people around us as it regards to this topic. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so let's start off by, I just want to set the stage with what is the status quo today. So currently in the culture, the status quo is our kids are being inundated by clear instructions, clear expectations of what dating and singleness is supposed to look like. Now, and it's happening every day. It happens. I can't remember the last television show, for instance, that promoted, that actually honored people not having sex before marriage. We've just all come to accept it. It's interesting in the Christian arena how conservative Christians will come in and be like, oh my goodness, a homosexual couple kissed on screen. But then we will watch entire series of couples who are sleeping together that aren't married and think that it's okay. And actually it's something that is expected, and like this is the culture, right? And so I just want to point out that a lot of us have been desensitized to this idea or this expectation, which is now that it's like the cultural norm is it's better to sleep with somebody or live with somebody before you get married. That's the cultural norm today. Now, don't misunderstand. I am not supporting some of these ideas, but this is you don't have to go very far or get very deep into any kind of conversation or any sort of media at all for this to be the message that our children are getting, but for this to be the message that we're getting. So here's some of the ones that I thought of in context of what's being promoted. Number one, it's okay to begin dating relationships as early as 11 or 12 years old. And it's cute, Number two, it's better to sleep together and even live together before you get married. I have heard Christian couples and parents say that, to be convinced of this, that oh, you should really, you want to get to know each other first. So you want to know if you're compatible. I remember somebody asking me about whether or not I had slept with Brandon before we got married. And I said that no, I hadn't. And they were like, well, how do you know you're compatible? And that's a whole different conversation, right? But it was just it's really elevated as wisdom. This is really important for you to figure out. So So that's another one. Number 3, cheating is okay if you're convinced it's your soulmate. That's something that is being promoted these days, that cheating is wrong unless you're really sure that it's the person, like it's your soulmate, it's the person that you're really supposed to be with. And then, I mean, it's kind of unfortunate, but go ahead. Like, ew. And then the last one I thought of, and just TMI warning here if you want to like mute. But if you didn't already mute this conversation, but the idea that masturbation and pornography is an expected and even celebrated normal way to, quote, endure singleness. It's almost like I have this disease of singleness and I need the medication of masturbation in order to survive my life. Or I have this raging desire for sex. And so that it's almost like we act like it's a disease that has to be medicated. The medication is pornography. And that way I can endure not sleeping with somebody all the time. And this is like, my concern is that parents think that they can protect their kids from these messages. And I guess if you're going to live on a farm out in the middle of nowhere and not spend any time with any people or watch any television or any movies or listen to any news or have any interaction with any other people in our culture, then I guess you could protect your kids from these messages. But if you go to church, because their church is made up of broken people, like all of us have fallen short of the glory of God. We've sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So if you go to church with other people besides you, you're going to come across these things in our culture right now. If you go to the store, if you listen to an advertisement, all these places where our families get these messages. So why am I saying that? Why am I harping on this? Because one of the things that I see as a coach and talking to a lot of clients is that parents have this idea that they're going to wait until their children come and talk to them about these things, and then they will know that, like, that's going to be the sign that they've been exposed to faulty thinking about these subjects, and then it'll be time for the parent to say something. So what I'm wanting to say to you is, now's the time to say something. Don't wait for them to come to you. They've already heard about it. They're already aware of some of these things. If they can talk, they've probably been exposed to it. So that's the unfortunate truth. And we don't like talking about things because we get uncomfortable, and maybe we're not really sure what to say. Maybe we're afraid we'll say the wrong thing, especially as teenagers. There's this nervousness, right? About, I don't really think they're dating the right person, but if I say something, it's going to make it worse. And how do I do that? Now, if you've got a relationship where you're trying to maintain a relationship with a son or daughter, and they're dating somebody that's no good for them, you need to just sign up for a call with me, because I can help walk you through that. And that's beyond the scope of what we have available today. But I can help you navigate that difficult circumstance. So if we want to get deep, reach out. But for today, I want to give you some ways to have conversations with your kids that's based on truth, that will help them in the process of dating and singleness, and might help create some conversation around these topics, that then if they aren't really commenting on things that are going on, that maybe this will set the groundwork for feeling comfortable to talk. We always say, I want my kids to feel like they can come and talk to me about anything. And one of the things that I encourage my super moms to talk to their kids about is like, yeah, so that starts If you want them to feel comfortable talking to you about anything, that starts with listen to their dumb conversations about Minecraft. It starts with listening to the silly stuff that you think is a waste of time, that is not interesting, that makes you want to like literally pull your own brains out of your head and like throw them in the garbage. Those things, you're setting the precedent for what, for their expectation of how safe are you to communicate with. Right there. It starts right there. And then when you start getting into conversations around people that they like, or how does this guy girl stuff all work, a mistake I made was I kind of teased him about it a little bit. Like sometimes we would talk about like, oh, well, I wonder who you're going to marry. And I just thought it was all fun and games because like they weren't really interested in any of these people and it wasn't really time, but I would tease them a little bit about like, oh, that's going to be a great match for you or whatever. And I regret that. I regret it. I didn't mean anything by it. Most of the people that I mentioned, it wasn't a realistic thing. We were just being silly. But what happened in that process was I set up a barrier accidentally with not fully realizing that that's what I was doing. I set up a barrier because their experience of discussing things around this topic was, mom teases me about this subject. And I don't want to feel, when I feel really vulnerable and I'm nervous about having a conversation about maybe actually liking somebody, I can't handle her teasing me like this. And so we've had to do a lot of work. We've had to like make up a lot of traction in that area because I was silly about it. I took it lighthearted. So I just encourage you not to tease them about it either. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you can have a conversation about. So the first one is that that marriage, and we've talked about this in other episodes, but marriage is unity of our body, soul, and spirit together with another person. The current process of dating looks like, let's unite the body and the soul. The soul is like mind, will, and emotions. Like, so we want to come together on what we think, how we feel, what we're going to do, and all the physical stuff. And then when we decide to get married, it's just kind of like, okay, we'll do it before God and add in the spiritual element of this, right? So that's kind of our current culture's thought process around this. Whereas in the Christian world, what we've done is like, oh, no. It's not okay to like unite body before you get married. But you can be united in spirit and soul and just stay away from uniting your body until you get married. And I just want to encourage you that that's also a wrong way of thinking about it. Ultimately, a marriage is the three coming together, united there. Matthew 19, verses 5-6. And I'm not sure what version this is. Actually, I'm going to switch it. Hold on. I want to read a different version. Just one I'm a little more familiar with. Okay. Matthew 19, verses 5 and 6. This says, starting in verse 4, it says, he answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer one flesh. They are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not a man separate. So the idea here is not just the physical flesh. We aren't talking about when somebody leaves their father and mother that they're becoming detached from their flesh. We're talking about we're detaching from from them in a spiritual authority way, in a, I have to come into alignment with their thinking and their processes and their way of life. And I'm joining onto, like, we do become one flesh, but we also become one spirit and one soul. Like, we are completely unified, because we aren't just bodies with a spirit. We are a spirit with a body, right? So when we come together, we're two spirits joining together with our bodies. And that is just as much a part of the marriage process as having intercourse the first night that, you're together. So this is a place where I feel like even the Christian world has kind of like gotten off track. They're like, oh, just keep the body thing. And what ends up happening is, and you can see it in other places, because somebody will say, well, my husband didn't actually have an affair with that person, but he had an emotional affair. What does that mean? Well, if he can have an emotional affair, meaning he's united with somebody else in an emotional way, that's, sorry, my Siri tried to turn on. He's united with somebody in an emotional way, and it's not okay according to, it's not okay for his marriage. Then it's not okay before you get married either, right? We get our hearts all committed before like, okay, now we're convinced that we ought to get together. So it's good to talk about the first thing I think it'd be good to talk about with your kids is, what are the definitions of these terms? What does dating mean to you? What does dating mean to them? What does engagement mean to you? What's the difference between if you're dating or you're engaged? What does being single mean to you? What are Proverbs 4:23 says, guard your heart above all else, for it is the source of life. So what does it mean to guard your heart in the process of looking for a spouse? Or, what's the purpose of dating? What's the purpose of coming together? And just, what does that look like? How do we guard our hearts? These are great conversations to have. And I want to encourage you that it's more important to have the conversation than it is to have all the right answers. If you can just open up the conversation and discuss it without necessarily feeling like you have to come to a right conclusion, then the ideas and the truth will have a place to marinate in their minds. If they've got the thoughts planted there, then God can do something with it. But they don't have any context, then the first context they're going to get is whatever they hear from the world. And that's not really what we want to do. So one thing that I like set the bar pretty high sometimes for my kids. We've had a couple of people be interested in other people, even do just a little bit of dating, not a lot. So not very far into this process myself, but setting the bar really high in the context of, my goal is, anytime you date somebody, what if you treat them as if they are someone else's spouse until they are your spouse, or unless they are your spouse? Because ultimately that's true, right? If we could see ahead into the future, this person is going to be married to somebody else. Well, we wouldn't behave with them in that way if they're married to somebody else. Now, I get that there's some differences, and that's a great conversation to have. Like, I might let my son go out to dinner with a girl by himself, even though they aren't married, or they aren't going to get married to each other. Like, whereas if she were married to somebody else, I would never think that was a good idea, right? So there's some places where, okay, we have to like veer off of that so that they can spend some time together, get to know each other a little bit. But But if you baseline it, like, remember that this is somebody else's potential spouse, it helps frame this, like, would you be willing to look at that spouse in the eye and say, I honored your wife, or I honored your husband in how I treated them while I was dating them? That's very different from the world, isn't it? In fact, some people in the world will say, well, I mean, I've actually heard people like, I don't want to marry a virgin. I want them to have had some experience. I don't want them working all that business out on me. What? Like, but then they, like, those thoughts don't go away. They have they keep them all. And I don't think our kids realize that they keep all their thoughts when they go into a marriage. We do, we know, because we have them, right? So the next thing that I would encourage you to have, so the first one was define your terms. Just talk about what these different things mean to you. And I want to encourage you, it's okay if you're like, you know what, I'm not really quite sure. I know it needs to have something about this. And I know that this aspect is important, but how that plays out in this area, I'm not really sure. That would be a fantastic conversation to have. The other thing that you can have a conversation around is tell them about your experiences. There was something that, and it's her story to tell, so I'm not going to tell the story, but my mom went through something when she was dating, and I didn't know about it. But there were certain aspects of my relationships with other people that she would get like super jumpy about, like, no, don't do that. Right. And it was like over the top intense. Not that what I was trying to do was right. It wasn't. But her response was so outside the realm of what typical response was. It was like, whoa, like, what just happened? I can't even have a conversation with you about this. But she didn't tell me about it. She didn't tell me the specifics about it. She just like, this is just wrong. And years later, she told me the specifics around this particular event in her life. And I thought, oh my goodness, it makes so much sense why that mattered to her so much when I was in that situation. Because she made a mistake. She made the mistake that she was trying to talk to me about, and she's lived with the consequences of that mistake. So in that moment, when she told me about that story, all of a sudden, I just had this feeling like, oh, I wish I had known that story. Like, at least it would have given me context for why she was so passionate about it. If not to also give her wisdom more weight. Now, we would like for kids to just ascribe to what we think, even if we don't give them the specifics. But the fact of the matter is, they don't. They don't. Giving them real life example of like, no, here's the devastating experience that I had, and this is why I care so very much about it. There are great reasons to talk about your failures with your children. Talk about the good things too. Did you do it right? Talk about the benefits of that and how much you appreciate it. So those are some of the topics that I think I would start with if I'm going to have a conversation with my kids. Now, as we're wrapping up, there's a couple of resources that I think you can really benefit from if you really want to dig into how to help people get set up for good dating relationships, working through singleness, things like that. One of them is Michael Todd, the lead pastor at Transformation Church, has a YouTube series called Relationship Goals. And I think it's the first 2 episodes talk about before the person. So like before you even start thinking about people, what's the foundation? Like Because if you don't lay that foundation, you're not going to get what you need from other people. So he talks about the importance of how God wants a relationship with you. He talks about if God isn't enough in your life, if you don't have that relationship down, no person is ever going to be sufficient in your life, because we get our sufficiency from God. And a lot of times people get into a relationship and they're trying to get like the Jerry Maguire phrase, the quote, "You complete me." Like, no, you don't. I was complete before I got to you. And hopefully you are too. And it's two complete people coming together to like for a common purpose and a common cause or common goal, right? But that only happens if we understand who we are in Christ and that God meets our needs. We don't get married to have a husband meet our needs. We don't get married to have a wife meet our needs. We get married because we have a purpose that he's called us to, and there's somebody else that's kind of like flowing along the same direction. We're like, whoa, we could do this better together than we can separate. That's why we get married. Growing up, when I was a teenager, my dad used to tell me that, and I was like, I will never think it that way. And now I'm like, oh my goodness, I hear my dad talking all the time. It's coming out of my own mouth. So so that really, Michael Todd talks about, and you can hear other places, but God desires to give us a place and a purpose, who we are before the person, because then you know who's going in the same direction as you, right? So he talks about that, and about the first one, and then the second one, he talks about the value of singleness. And this one is great if you've got kids that are really struggling to, or even single, like adult single children, they're struggling to figure out what to do while they're alone. Like maybe they're dating, but they haven't found the one and it's getting discouraging, or maybe they're even having trouble dating or whatever. What is it that they're supposed to be focused on during that time, right? So, and one of the things that I wanted to highlight from that part 2 of that series is the point that he makes, that it's okay to be single, but it's not good to be alone. And that alone doesn't mean equal lonely. Like, so we're not talking about, I think a lot of times people equate all three of those: single, alone, lonely. They're all the same, but no, they aren't. They aren't all the same. Lonely is, he talks about, is a state of sadness because one has no friends or company. Like, I just don't have people around me to like connect with. But alone, in the context of it is not good for man to be alone, in that context, the Hebrew is, it's not good for man to be all in one, like an all-in-one deal. And so he took man and he split him into two parts, two different aspects, so that he wasn't all in one. So that's not the same as lonely. It's like, hey, there's two complementary pieces to this puzzle. But then alone doesn't mean single either. So singleness looks like I'm separate and I'm unique. I'm distinct. I am special. I'm whole as I am in a unique way. I'm singular. Like I have my own. I'm thinking about it like when you go to a museum and there's like a really expensive piece of like sculpture, then it gets its own box, right? It gets its own box. It gets its own light. It has its own little placard. It's not like it's over there and you're like, yeah, here are two sculptures by Michelangelo or by whoever, it's this and this. and then they're boxed together. They don't do them that way, because the single thing is so unique and so incredible all by itself. It would be insulting to decide that you needed to put it with something else on display, right? So they would show them separately. Even if they're matching pieces, there would be ways to show them distinctly individually, right? So maybe you have like beautiful bookends, or two complementary statues, right? You might have them near each other. They might complement each other in the display, but they aren't like right up there next to each other saying, here's this one and this one together. It would say, here's this one, and here's its pair, this one. So they're both single and unique. And I think that is the best conversation we can have with our kids is, what does it mean to be single well before or even during a marriage? I will say the best years of my marriage have come after I quit trying to have Brandon be an extension of me, right? Like, oh, this is the part of, like, Brandon is the part of me that I suck at. Like, I suck at finances. So that's why I married Brandon, because he's the finance guy, right? And so good thing I have him, because I can't live without him. No, like, what if I own that I need to take 100% responsibility for my own financial choices and learn how to do that, and not put all that pressure and weight on him, that it's up to him to meet that whole need in our family? Does that mean that like now I'm doing the books and he isn't? No, it's not about like the physical doing of the thing. It's about how I think about it. Like, am I willing to grow and become a single, unique individual, fully developed in Christ, in even areas that I feel weak in, even after I've gotten married, knowing that I become a better spouse for him? Like, we work together better if I develop those weaknesses and he develops his, so that we're both singularly growing. That makes the most amazing marriage. And you can work on those things before you ever get married, while you're dating, while you're waiting for the person. And so singleness is something that you can maximize while you're not married. Like, hey, how can I experience more of the world? How can I like more of like, like get bigger perspective is what I'm talking about. Not like, oh, let's just go saturate ourselves in simple culture. But like one of my sons just had the opportunity to go up to Montana and spend some time with some friends we have there, and do some work for them. It was an opportunity, and I was like, oh my goodness, please say yes. Please say you'll go. Why? Because he's going to come back with all this perspective about how life works and how it works differently for different people that live in different areas. And it just opens up a wider variety of understanding of, suddenly he will see opportunities in ways that he didn't. He's going to learn about some real estate. He learns about different environmental situations. So, and I think about this when people go on mission trips too. They'll go off to a foreign country, right? And get to experience what life is really like in a place that is not as posh as the United States. And they come back with a whole different perspective, a lot more gratefulness for what they've been given. They don't take it for granted as much. I remember a friend of mine went to Kenya one time and spent some time over there with a friend. And when he came back, he was like, wow, I waste a lot of water washing my dish. Because over there, the water's precious, and they don't spend it washing the dish all the time. You just like clean it off. You don't need more than one. You got a dish and a utensil sometimes. That's it. It's good. You can just like knock the stuff off, maybe rinse it just a little bit, but then reuse it over and over again. No need to wash that thing. And so it's just an example, right? Of like he came back and he had this total like awareness of, wow, we spend a lot of time and energy and a lot of work washing a lot of dishes that aren't necessary, you know? So it's just like, and somehow these people have survived. So that's not to say you need to stop washing your dishes, right? But what I am saying is saying yes to all kinds of opportunities while you're single. You can maximize it and gain a whole different perspective. And that's a great conversation to have with your kids. A lot of kids right now talk, you know, you're like, hey, maybe you ought to volunteer at Vacation Bible School. And they're like, I don't want to do that. Well, guess how I learned to do public speaking first? Because I started doing it at Vacation Bible School type events where I got thrown in front of a crowd of kids who really didn't care whether or not I was a good speaker or not. And I got over my fear of speaking to people where it didn't really matter a lot, so that when I was speaking at larger crowds and larger events, I was able to. But it's not like I went to school for that. It's not like, I mean, I didn't graduate with a public speaking degree. I don't even know if that's a thing, but whatever, you know, like theater or whatever. So having the conversation of like, let's cast the vision for how you can say yes to opportunities to broaden your perspective. Say yes to doing service projects or things like that with people that you're interested in. So that you can see them in a wider variety of situations. I'm so thankful for the times that like Brandon and I, before we got married, we did some things like we did some service projects together for the community. We ran some events at church for the youth group together. We did go out on dates, like go to a restaurant, go out to a movie, go to a Braves game. We did some of those things, but we also did things like we went to my little sister's piano recital together. He went to the family reunion with us, you know, different things like that, so that you see the person in a variety of different circumstances. You see them not just on their best behavior on a date, but you see them like when they're called to serve, when they are required to be flexible, when they're required to get messy, when they're required to be fancy. We went to a fancy event just because I wanted to know, like, does he know how to wear a tie? Can he sit in a symphony? Is he willing to dress up? You know, like, what are we in for here? Just like how many different wide variety of things can we try? And do group things so that you can see how he interacts with, you know, friends and stuff. So all talking with your kids about these things will help you have set the stage for good conversations with them as they are growing and learning and learning how to build relationships. And hopefully it leads to good conversations about, hey, I found this person, I think they're the one. And it won't be any big deal to talk to you about it then, because you'll have been having conversations for years. So I hope this has been helpful for you. Some good things, good tips for conversations around this subject. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. We'll be meeting on Monday next week if you're coming to the live sessions. So yeah, otherwise, thanks for joining me. If you're on Zoom, hang out. And then and we'll chat. See you next week.